In the first few years of planting a church in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., while my congregation was still small and our budget was tight, our leaders made a critical decision, a decision that would dramatically impact the legacy of our church for generations. That decision was to begin a church planting residency. The simple choice to start training future missional leaders in our church has resulted in our church becoming a virtual maternity ward for dozens of new churches in our region and around the world. A residency is an intentional plan for developing members of our congregation into missionaries from our congregation. It starts with the simple reality that there is really only one essential ingredient required for your church to multiply, and that ingredient is a ready leader to send. You may think that in order to lead your church to multiply, you need a big budget or another facility, maybe additional staff or equipment, but I'm here to tell you that none of those things are essential to church planting. What is essential is a ready leader. Because an equipped leader has the skill and the passion to gather all of the other resources required to plant a church. So if you desire to lead your church to multiply, to plant other churches, the first and the most impactful step you can take is to make and execute an intentional plan to develop members into missionaries. No doubt, when you hear the word residency, you think of the medical community, and it's for good reason. Medical residents take the knowledge they've gained from medical school and they begin to apply that to patients under the supervision of an experienced doctor. In pastoral residencies, members learn from seasoned pastors, not just as an academic exercise, but through the practical discipleship that comes with working with a seasoned and fruitful pastoral leader. When you think of a church residency, you might think of a conference table with one experienced pastor on the end instructing a table full of aspiring leaders. And no doubt residencies do include times like that. But what a pastoral residency really is one pastor pouring his life into another. Residencies don't need to be complicated in order to be effective. When our church started offering a church planting residency, we had just one resident at a time, and we had no curriculum to guide me and no budget to pay our residents. And honestly, I'm glad we didn't. I simply made it a priority to have a formal mentoring relationship with those who showed an interest in pastoral ministry or showed pastoral potential. I often have the experience of hearing from a pastor who wants to begin a residency, but doesn't know where to get started. So, in case that's you, allow me to share a few simple ideas that I think will help you get moving right away. First, focus on equipping, not on calling. You might be tempted to think, I don't have anybody in my church who's feeling called to start a church. Listen, that is the absolute wrong way to think about it. The scripture never commands you as a pastor to evaluate calling in somebody's life before starting to equip them. But as a pastor, you are commanded to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. See, calling often works itself out in time and circumstance. It isn't necessary for a person to be called or even to express an aspiration for ministry before you as their pastor can begin equipping them for ministry. In almost every instance, those who have led church planting teams from the church that I planted were invited into some form of equipping before they were sure of their ministry calling. Those conversations were almost always initiated by me or by another leader in our church. A conversation that goes something like this. Hey, Brian, I've noticed that you seem to have a real hunger for God and His Word, and you're a good shepherd in your household. You love your wife and your children. You care about them spiritually. I've also noticed that you share the gospel with your coworkers and your friends, and you care about the spiritual lives of those people who live around you. Those are all the qualities we look for in pastors and church planners. So I don't know if you've ever considered becoming a pastor or a church planner, but I want you to know that if you ever did have that desire, a desire for that kind of work, I'd be eager as your pastor to help prepare you. So if you're sitting around waiting for somebody to walk up to you after a church service and say, "Hey, pastor, I'm feeling called to start a church. What should I do?" You'll likely never lead your church to multiply. A residency is nothing more than a discipleship plan, and true discipleship always includes challenging people to the next stage of growth and maturity, and it always has the mission of God as its aim. Second, you should start simple. My all-time favorite quote is from the English writer and theologian G.K. Chesterton, who famously said, "Anything worth doing is worth doing poorly at first." I love that quote because it reminds me that it's okay to get started on something that's worth doing, even if I can't do it perfectly at first. And when we started offering a church planting residency, it really wasn't all that great, but it was worth doing. It was worth dedicating my time to, and I want to encourage you to think about residency in the same way. I'm convinced that our next great wave of pastors and church planters is already in our congregations, and that it's my job as a pastor to prepare them for a life of service to King Jesus and to walk with them and prepare them to make Jesus known throughout the world.